Hi Dragons, this is Fear Part 3 and Attachment Disorder. So we're continuing our discussion of attachment disorder and borderline personality disorder. So we were talking about impulsivity in Dutton's work. So Dutton also found that associations between attachment insecurity on borderline personality disorder was found with impulsivity and domestic violence as well. True for women as well. And the court-mandated subjects that they did their research with were noted for their abusiveness and lack of secure base, also for their children, and they called that the modal family. Okay, so it was both ways. If you look at what's going on with attachment and violence and aggression, you look at both partners, it's called the dyadic relationship kind of analysis, and they're looking at how does attachment and violence occur between partners, and it's important to understand what is the relationship between both partners. So it's important to assess their attachment style to see what is the connection between how that bears out in a particular relationship. And Dutton did a lot of research on this and found that there were two main styles: the pursuit strategy and the distancing strategy. The pursuit strategy was where violence forced one partner to focus on the other, and the distancing strategy was, of course, pushing the other partner away. So when you look at research on both of these styles and the attachment between two partners in a relationship, we see that there is common to see violence on both sides of the relationship, okay? And that if they both engage in negative relationships, negative instances continuously, then that is a predictor of the destruction of the relationship and deterioration as well. So what about attachment, poor attachment, and violence and aggression toward the self? So that's really an interesting area of study for attachment, and suicide is one of those things that was late for attachment theorists to start studying, but they found that when they did start studying it, it is a interesting correlate. So they started out by looking at what happens when someone is divorced and separated, because then that attachment bond is gone. And they found out that those people were twice as likely to commit suicide than those who were married and had good attachment relationships, okay? The men were 4 times more likely to commit suicide after a divorce or separation, and white males had the highest rate of all. Okay, so if suicide is a form of aggression or self toward the self, then why are men more prone to it than women? Well, men are more prone to violent suicide to begin with. Successful suicides, women are more associated with attempts that are not successful. But still, it begs the question of why is it that men are more prone toward this? You know, on the battlefield, the most frequently uttered words as a soldier is dying is a cry out to their mother. Mom is usually the last word, or mother is usually the last word, and that is a representation for a strong desire for attachment, even in death and in battle. So soldiers are in frightening conditions, okay? So a lot of the different types of attachment studies do have to do with the military, okay? And what happens to an individual who is surrounded by violence and aggression? You know, does it, if they have good attachment figures, does that result in less violence and aggression in terms of soldiers, okay? And I did post a video for you to watch, or, you know, a recommendation for you to watch, and please do those forum responses, because they are a part of your grade. And I've seen students who neglected to do all the forum ones and go from an A to a C in the semester because they just thought that they weren't important. So please do that. So anyway, please take a look at that. Transient criminality. Transient criminality is a crime that occurs, that a subject perpetrates, but it's not part of their personality to be violent and aggressive. So it's more like the Zimbardo's bad barrel sort of thing. They're in a bad situation, and the condition, the situation that they find themselves is extremely stressful, like natural disasters, combat, things like that. Notable psychological changes are produced. One is particularly their identity is diffused. In the military, everybody looks alike. They have the same haircut. They have the same uniform, and so it's easy to lose your individuality or identity. And so again, a sense of depersonalization that goes along with that. You also have an impaired sense of self-worth because everybody is equal. Everybody's a soldier, except for the people who are officers. So sometimes soldiers suffer from impaired self-worth. Also impairments in memory and perceptual functioning. These are when you have military instances that are really transient criminality. Partial loss of abstract standards, like what is morally correct, what are the different legal issues. So you're actually in the military in a war situation, you are to seek and destroy, i.e. kill the enemy, whereas otherwise you come back to a society where that is frowned upon. So it's very interesting to see how people cope with that sort of thing. A decline in intellectual functioning. So it's not as important for you to function intellectually. You're trained actually to obey orders and disregard your individual thoughts. So that could be really difficult in a stressful situation where you're not looking at problem-solving intellectual inputs as much. So combat stress produces chronic increases in the sympathetic nervous system and arousal. Bowlby called this seeking behavior, seeking an attachment as part of the behavioral system. And there's no security or familiar security source in the military to attach, other than, you're part of, your particular country's military. So this result increases the sympathetic nervous system arousal. The individual's cognitive map begins to disintegrate, and it makes it difficult and more complex for the subject to understand what is happening, what's going on, and just basically to follow orders. It's the opposite of thinking and figuring things out that are related to attachment, things that they went through as kids and adolescents, young adults. So Baumeister believed that subjects' identity and the self breaks down and their consciousness is altered. We're talking about military experiences that are extremely negative and extremely stressful. Some sort of military encounter that someone finds themselves into, and they can't figure it out. So instead of seeking out ways to reduce this distress, the soldier becomes more impulsive and then engages in destructive behavior. And these are things that explain different situations of bad behavior in the military, like when we watched the Zimbardo video, and he was talking about the prison that the prisoners were held in, and how the soldiers engaged in behavior that ordinarily they wouldn't have anyway. So under these circumstances, we see atrocities that are easier to happen, okay? Like what happened in Zimbardo's prison that he looked at for the government, and is situations like the rape of Nanking and the My Lai massacre, those kinds of things. So it also affects their memory and what they discussed at trial, like during the My Lai massacre, and they were testifying. They said things like, in the village, the mothers were throwing their booby-trapped babies at them, which was not true. They testified, and they called it the Battle of My Lai, and there was no soldier there. There was no battle. It was a village of elderly people and women and children. So there was no battle. They were the only ones that were fighting. So it changed their perception of what happened. It changed their distortion, their memory, all of those kinds of things. It wasn't all the people, but it was a lot of them. So there's an example of Zimbardo's bad barrel because of a particular situation. And so some people, most of them did engage in bad behavior, and some people did not, and attachment theorists say that it was individual differences, and so they're still studying those sorts of things as well. And I put some pictures of the My Lai massacre up there for you to see, and other horrific sorts of things that occurred. So take a look at those pictures. If you look at holy wars, that religion has been used in every single war. World War I, World War II, different wars from different countries, the Civil War, the Crusades, everything from history to today. And attachment theorists think that it's easier to fight when it's a religious cause, because what's the ultimate attachment? Okay? We in the United States couldn't figure out why someone would fly a plane into a building, kill themselves, and making a point in the process. And it was revealed that some of the individuals were promised everlasting life, which is actually something that's happened throughout all the wars in history. If you're fighting a holy war, everlasting life. And what is a greater attachment than that? There is no greater attachment than that. So religion then becomes the ultimate attachment for someone who's in a war. It's a very powerful motivator for humans, because it is that attachment, everlasting life, that you will have forever. Two researchers found that Christians were more likely than atheists to just define the enemy in religious terms and condone bombing, killing, etc. after that. And, you know, there are so many examples. It's not just Christians, but every culture, religion has examples of this. It's quite interesting. So it affects your worldview, and there's a slide there, slide 29, about Armageddon as a motivating factor in terms of religious as well. The other thing that they talk about is terror management, death anxiety. So some people are willing to engage in violence and aggression because they have a fear of death. They're very worried about it, and it's a way to kind of manage this fear. So some researchers looked at, you know, are people aware of this, that they're acting violently and aggressive because of attachment and awareness of their own death. And they found that people who were had insecure attachment wanted to punish offenders more and judge other people more harshly, and would engage in violent and aggressive behaviors than people who weren't. And then they found that there were other people who had secure attachments, and they called these people symbolic immortality. They had symbolic immortality, and they focused on the things that would be left behind after their death, the positive things that they had done in their life that were transformational, constructive. Maybe they're investing in children, in their future. Maybe they're naming a building or doing something for the community, that kind of like their legacy, okay? And we see this all the time. So we see people who are doing things out of terror management that are positive in that regard. They have a secure attachment. During the Rwanda genocide, the soldiers, especially child soldiers, were forced to kill someone from their own village to break their attachment toward that village. Sometimes they would, and they do this in North Korea. In North Korea, the kids are encouraged to turn in their own family members, their own parents, if they are seen violating some sort of edict from the president, okay? And what that does is it breaks the attachment of the child to the parent, and it makes it easier to be violent and aggressive by turning them in. And then the attachment then transfers to the country or to the leader. So these are all strategies that are used, you know, not just in wars and things like that, but also for nationalistic types of purposes as well. So that's basically attachment and all of its manifestations: fear, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, all of those sorts of things. I really like attachment theory, and I think that it explains a lot of violent and aggressive behaviors. So the next set of videos we will make for next week, we will talk about other sorts of violence and aggression kinds of things, and then the week after that we will do our presentations for your major field projects. So stay tuned, do your research, look on Moodle repeatedly so that if you can see what I post up there, and I'll see you soon. See you later. Stay safe, my dragons. Dragon strong. It's a great day to be a dragon.